Imagine you have a security system in your house. Most people think the security system is there to sound the alarm when a burglar breaks in. It screams, it flashes lights, it calls the police. That's the dramatic part. But what if I told you the most important thing that system does isn't starting the alarm, but turning it off? Imagine if, after the burglar left, the alarm just kept screaming for days. Ideally, you want a system that knows exactly when the threat is over and resets the house to silence. If you don't have that reset button, living in that house becomes unbearable.
That is a surprisingly accurate way to describe what we're talking about today. Because for decades, popular culture has obsessed over the alarm part of our body's chemistry, specifically cortisol. We call it the stress hormone. We blame it for belly fat, for anxiety, for keeping us awake. But if you look at the physiology, cortisol isn't just the guy who pulls the fire alarm. Cortisol is actually the fire chief who shows up to tell the crew, okay, the fire is out, put down the hoses, and stop smashing windows.
And that distinction matters, because if you are someone living with adrenal insufficiency, whether that's Addison's disease or secondary adrenal insufficiency, you know that the stress label feels incomplete. You might feel fine emotionally, but your body feels like it's fighting a war. You get a minor cold and it knocks you out for 2 weeks. You exercise and you ache for days. If cortisol is just about stress, why does the lack of it make you feel so physically inflamed?
Exactly. That physical sensation, that aching, flu-like, dragging feeling, is directly tied to the function of cortisol we almost never discuss, its role as the body's master immunosuppressant. We're going to look at a breakdown from My Adrenal Life that argues we need to completely reframe how we see this hormone. The article posits that for patients with adrenal insufficiency, the problem isn't just that they can't mount a stress response, it's that they can't turn their immune system off once it gets started.
So let's start with that rebranding. If it's not just the stress hormone, what is it? The National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases, the NIDDK, classifies it as essential for life, regulating everything from blood pressure to metabolism, but you're focusing on something more specific, inflammation.
Right, think about inflammation. It is a necessary evil. If you cut your finger, you need inflammation. You need white blood cells to rush there. You need swelling to protect the tissue. You need heat to kill bacteria. That is the immune system hitting the gas pedal. But here is the catch. The immune system has a very heavy foot. It doesn't know when to stop. Left to its own devices, the immune system would just keep attacking that cut until it damaged the healthy tissue around it. It would turn to skirmish into a scorched earth campaign.
And cortisol is the brake.
It is the brake. In a healthy body, a few minutes after that immune response triggers, your adrenals release cortisol. That cortisol travels to the site of the injury and tells the white blood cells, good job, threat contained, stand down. Without cortisol, the immune response just keeps cascading.
This reminds me of something I read about the history of this discovery. We treat cortisol as this modern stress villain, but when Hensch and Kendall won the Nobel Prize for it in 1950, they weren't studying stress at all. They were studying rheumatoid arthritis.
Precisely. That is a critical piece of context. Philip Hensch at the Mayo Clinic noticed that his patients with severe crippling arthritis, an inflammatory autoimmune disease, would suddenly get better if they got jaundice or became pregnant. He suspected there was some natural substance involved. When they finally isolated cortisone and gave it to a bedridden arthritis patient, she got up and walked within days. They didn't discover a stress hormone, they discovered the most potent anti-inflammatory agent in human history. That is its lineage.
So bring this back to the person with adrenal insufficiency, AI. If their adrenal glands are broken, primary AI, or if their pituitary isn't sending the signal, secondary AI, they don't have this automatic brake. The article mentions that patients often feel inflamed, achy, or unsettled without a clear reason. Is that literally unchecked inflammation?
It is highly likely. Let's get technical for a moment to explain why. Inside your cells, there is a protein complex called NF-kappa B. You can think of NF-kappa B as the master switch for inflammation. When it's activated, it goes into the cell nucleus and turns on the genes that produce cytokines. Those are the signaling molecules that cause fever, aches, and swelling. Now, normally, cortisol enters the cell, grabs onto that NF-kappa B, and prevents it from doing its job. It physically blocks the inflammatory signal.
So in a patient with untreated or undertreated AI, this NF-kappa B switch is just flipping on and staying on.
It's much easier for it to flip on and much harder to turn off. This is why the article mentions that recovery takes longer. If a healthy person gets a cold virus, their immune system spikes, kills the virus, and then cortisol shuts the party down so they can recover. In someone with adrenal insufficiency, the immune system spikes, kills the virus, but then lingers. It keeps shouting. That lingering cytokine activity is what makes you feel like you've been hit by a truck even after the virus is technically gone.
That explains the flu-like feeling perfectly. But I want to push back on something. Patients with AI take medication. They take hydrocortisone or prednisone. They are replacing the hormone. So if they are taking the pill, why doesn't the break work?
This is the million-dollar question in endocrinology, and it's something researchers are still struggling to solve. The issue is the difference between a static dose and a dynamic rhythm. A healthy set of adrenal glands is not a vending machine that drops a candy bar twice a day. It's a thermostat. It is reading your blood constantly. Did you just run up the stairs? Squeeze out a little cortisol. Did you get startled by a loud noise? Pulse a little more. Is it 4 a.m.? Start ramping up for the day.
And a pill is just a pill. You take it at 8 a.m., and it hits your bloodstream, spikes, and then fades.
Correct. We call it the pharmacokinetic mismatch. Research published in Frontiers in Immunology has looked at this circadian connection. In a healthy person, cortisol rises sharply before you even wake up, the cortisol awakening response. This pre-dawn rise is actually priming your immune system for the day, suppressing the inflammatory cytokines that naturally build up while you sleep. Most patients take their meds after they wake up, so they've already spent hours in a state of low cortisol inflammation before the first pill even hits their stomach.
That gap seems huge. It means you're always playing catch-up. And if you have a stressful event at 2 p.m., say a near-miss car accident or a heated argument, your pills from the morning are wearing off. Your body screams inflammation, danger, and your adrenal glands, which should be responding, are silent.
And that is where the symptoms creep in. The article emphasizes that cortisol prevents excessive or prolonged immune responses. If you are relying on a pill you took 4 hours ago, and you encounter a stressor, your immune system might overreact because there's no fresh cortisol there to restrain it. You might feel hot, shaky, nauseous, or just incredibly tired. That isn't just stress in your mind, it is a chemical imbalance in your immune regulation.
I want to clarify the types of adrenal insufficiency here, because the article lists primary, secondary, tertiary, and iatrogenic. Do these immune issues apply to all of them? I know with Addison's primary AI, there's an autoimmune component where the body attacks the adrenal glands. Does that make the inflammation worse?
It's a compound problem for Addison's patients. With primary AI, you have the double whammy. Your immune system is already dysregulated enough to attack your own organs, that's the autoimmune cause, and now you lack the very hormone needed to control immune dysregulation. But functionally, the lack of the brake applies to all types. Whether you have secondary AI from a pituitary tumor or steroid-induced AI from taking prednisone for asthma, once your natural production stops, you lose that real-time immune control. The NIDDK is very clear that the symptoms, fatigue, weakness, potential for crisis, overlap heavily because the end result is the same, a cortisol deficit.
Let's talk about that term steroid-induced AI or iatrogenic AI. That seems like a cruel irony. You take steroids, which are synthetic cortisone, to treat inflammation, but taking them for too long turns off your own cortisol production. So when you stop, you're left with inflammation?
It is a difficult physiological irony. When you flood the body with external steroids, prednisone, dexamethasone, the brain sees all that cortisol signal and says, oh, we have plenty, shut down the factory. The pituitary stops signaling the adrenals. If you stop the medication suddenly, the factory is dormant. It can't spin up fast enough. So yes, you can end up in a state of profound adrenal insufficiency where your original inflammation might come roaring back because now you have neither the drug nor your own hormone to manage it.
The article uses a phrase I really like, gentle empowerment. It says it's not in your head, and it's not a failure. It's your body working under a different set of conditions. That seems vital because so many patients are told their labs look fine. If you take your pill, your blood cortisol level might look normal an hour later. But that doesn't capture the inflammation happening in the tissues, does it?
No, a serum cortisol test is just a snapshot of the gas tank at one specific moment. It doesn't tell you how the engine is running, and it certainly doesn't measure those inflammatory markers like IL-6 or TNF-alpha in real time. This is why patients can have normal numbers but feel terrible. The medical literature, including reviews in the Journal of Endocrinology, supports this disconnect. We are good at keeping patients alive with replacement therapy. We are not yet perfect at giving them their quality of life back. The nuance is in that dynamic regulation.
So if you are a patient listening to this and you feel that deep, aching fatigue after a minor stressor, what is the takeaway? Is it just take more meds?
We have to be very careful there. The answer is rarely just take more, because over-replacing has its own dangers: weight gain, bone loss, diabetes. It's about understanding the mechanism so you can manage your energy. If you know your brake is faulty, you have to drive the car differently. You might need to be more aggressive about rest before you crash. You might need to recognize that emotional stress requires the same physiological recovery as running a marathon. It is about validation. When you feel that ache, it's not you being weak. It is a chemical cascade that your body is struggling to dampen.
I think that validation is key. We live in a society that tells us to push through, mind over matter. But if your matter lacks the molecule required to reset the system, pushing through physically damages you.
It does. And there's a safety aspect here, too. In a true adrenal crisis, which is life-threatening, the trigger is often an infection or a major injury. Why? Because the body's demand for cortisol skyrockets to control the massive inflammation of sepsis or trauma. If you can't meet that demand, the inflammation causes shock, blood pressure collapses. So on a smaller scale, those daily symptoms are mini versions of that supply and demand problem. Recognizing them early, I feel achy, I feel inflamed, can be a warning sign to slow down or consult your endocrinologist about stress dosing.
I want to circle back to the immune system balance. The article clarifies that cortisol doesn't turn off the immune system, but keeps it proportionate. There's a fear, I think, among some people that cortisol is just bad for immunity. Like, stress makes you sick, so cortisol must suppress your ability to fight cancer or viruses. But it's more complex, isn't it?
It is much more nuanced. Without cortisol, your immune system is like a fire hose that no one is holding. It's spraying everywhere, damaging your own house. You need cortisol to aim the water. Research shows that glucocorticoids actually help redistribute immune cells to where they are needed most, like the skin or lymph nodes during an acute challenge. It's an optimizer, not just a suppressor. The goal of the body isn't zero inflammation, it's resolution. Cortisol is the hormone of resolution. It helps the body pivot from fighting to healing.
Resolution. That is a beautiful word for it. It's the period after the event. And for people with AI, that resolution phase is where the struggle lies. The event happens, but the resolution is delayed or absent.
And that lack of resolution wears you down. It's what we call sickness behavior in biology. The lethargy, the withdrawal, the sensitivity to pain. Those are evolutionarily designed behaviors induced by cytokines to make you rest so you can heal.
If your cortisol isn't clearing those cytokines, you are stuck in sickness behavior mode even when you aren't technically sick.
That reframes the entire experience of chronic illness in this context. It's not just fatigue, it's a stuck switch. Before we wrap up, I want to touch on the distinction between this and the popular concept of adrenal fatigue, because the internet loves that term, but the article is very specific about medical adrenal insufficiency.
Yes, and we must be rigorous here. Adrenal fatigue is a term often used in wellness circles to describe burnout, but it is not a recognized medical diagnosis. Your adrenals don't just get tired and decide to work at 80% capacity because you drank too much coffee. In true adrenal insufficiency, AI, the gland is physically damaged or disconnected. The cortisol levels are measurably, dangerously low. The symptoms might overlap, tiredness, burnout, but the mechanism in AI is a hard physiological stop, not a soft functional decline. The danger of mixing them up is that someone with actual AI needs life-saving hormones, not just a vacation and better diet.
Right, we are talking about a broken organ, not a tired lifestyle. So looking forward, does this understanding of inflammation change how patients should manage their days? It seems like listening to the body isn't just advice, it's a medical necessity.
It is a survival skill. If you understand that your body lacks the automatic dampener for inflammation, you become the manual operator of that dampener. You have to consciously choose environments that lower your inflammatory load. You have to be rigid about your sleep hygiene because you don't have the natural morning cortisol spike to clean up the mess of a bad night's sleep. You have to advocate for yourself with doctors when you feel that flu-like crash coming on, understanding that it might be a signal that your cortisol coverage is too thin for your current stress load.
It puts the power back in the patient's hands, at least partially. Instead of feeling like a victim of random symptoms, you can look at it like an engineer. My system is overheating because my cooling fluid, cortisol, is low.
An engineer is the perfect analogy. You are manually operating a system that is automatic for everyone else. It is exhausting, yes, but knowing why it's happening, knowing that it's NF-κB and cytokines and a lack of glucocorticoid signaling takes away the mystery. And taking away the mystery reduces the fear.
And reducing fear, ironically, reduces stress, which saves you a little bit of that precious cortisol you do have. It really is all connected. This has been such an illuminating look at a hormone we think we know, but really don't. We've gone from the stress villain to the inflammation hero, and hopefully that helps anyone listening understand their own body a little bit better.
It's about balance. And for those with AI, finding that balance is a daily act of courage.
A daily act of courage, indeed. Thank you for breaking this down with us. If this episode helped you make sense of your symptoms, or if you know someone navigating adrenal insufficiency who needs to hear this validation, please pass it along to them.